Hello, I'm the Game Professor, and I'm here to talk about Other M's gameplay. So, there is an analysis coming up for Other M. That's Metroid Other M. And, it's a doozy. I'm only doing this analysis because of a Patreon goal that was reached that allowed everyone to vote for a terrible game for me to analyze, and Other M won. I was kind of surprised it did compared to games like Sonic 06 and Ride to Hell Retribution, games that are just famously terrible, but Other M is infamous for having a terrible story. So I guess it makes sense. My analyses are all about the story. Obviously, if gameplay factors into the story, then that's talked about as well, but it's not the focus. I'm not going to talk about how fun it is to play or anything like that. So this is my opportunity to talk a little bit about that, give you guys some of my impressions before the analysis goes live. So, basic description of the game in terms of its gameplay, it's kind of a merging between the two-dimensional and three-dimensional Metroid games. It mostly is played from a third-person perspective, but you can go into first-person. You just play it with the Wii Remote, no nunchuck or anything, just the Wii Remote sideways, and then you aim it at the screen to go into first-person. So yeah, the third-person action, this game was developed with the help of Team Ninja, the creators of Ninja Gaiden, or not creators of Ninja Gaiden, but the people who brought it into 3D, and the Dead or Alive series, which I'll talk about more in the analysis. Terrible idea to give Samus's character development to the creators of Dead or Alive Extreme Beach Volleyball, but whatever. The third-person gameplay is actually where you can see the most... You can really see their work there. Sometimes the gameplay just really shines. Like, occasionally it's very enjoyable, and there were a lot of times that I very much enjoyed playing the game. It felt like a unique kind of Metroid game, but still a Metroid game nonetheless. There were other times, unfortunately, where it really didn't. It just failed spectacularly on occasion, so I'll just talk a little bit about the specifics. I do have to say the Wii Remote is not... it's kind of awkward. I understand why they went with the control decisions that they did, but that tiny little D-pad can be really awkward to move around with sometimes, and eventually, if you play for long enough, it just kind of starts hurting your thumb. Maybe it's just been too long since I've had to play with D-pads, and maybe I'm just kind of a wimp now, but it is so tiny, too. It makes it kind of difficult. There was a cool little mechanic that made it more interesting to fight in groups of enemies, where you can, jump on them and then charge beam and smash or not smash, blow up their head with the charge beam, and that was pretty cool. I enjoyed that. It's definitely kind of the execution mechanic that's so popular now that I don't know if it really has much of a place in a Metroid game, but I enjoyed using it well enough. Now, the idea of aiming at the screen with the Wii Remote in order to go into first-person mode, it's an interesting idea, and I feel like it kind of works generally, but it's also kind of awkward. To be fair, like the Metroid Prime games, you also had to, or at least the first two, you had to, hold a button and stand still in order to aim around, but I don't know, making it so that you need to stand completely still whenever you want to aim in first person at things. It also makes it so that you need to go into first person to use missiles. It's not just a special thing that you can use in general. Missiles are something you can only use when you are in first person mode. And it would occasionally just kind of change whether you were using the missiles or the beams depending on what you were aiming at, and it had to lock on to use them. It kind of complicate... Hi, Cookie Cat. This is my kitten, Cookie Cat. I guess I'll just let her be here. It kind of complicated things and made things a little awkward to use occasionally. I'd be trying to shoot at something in first-person mode, and then an enemy would cross my beam, and then I would lock onto it instead, and it was kind of irritating. It's kind of the same issue with the whole game, really, that it's the controls work alright, but then occasionally something weird happens, and it's irritating. It's far from perfect in terms of how it controls. Now, generally speaking, the combat works really well... Yes, hello, kitten. The combat works really well when there are groups of enemies that are around you. Because of that, that whole jumping on them and blasting their heads thing was pretty cool. But that's when you're dodging. It has this cool sense move thing where when you hit the fire and direction button at the right time, Samus slow-mo dodges out of the way and then has a fully charged charge beam when she's out of it. And, when there are a bunch of enemies around, the combat can be pretty interesting. When there are only a few enemies around, or really weak enemies, or one enemy, significantly less so. Since it's in third person, but not just straight up two-dimensional, there's, a bit of an auto-aim mechanic, and it makes sense. It would be incredibly frustrating if it wasn't there, but it does make it so Like you'll see a bunch of enemies flying around, and you can just run straight for them and mash the fire button, and Samus just, boom, 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 all gone. A couple times I even managed to just run around in circles mashing the fire button, and she would just automatically aim at whatever was in the general direction she was facing, and managed to clear some rooms like that. It was kind of weird. There are some really interesting boss fights. Like generally when it has you fighting one enemy, if it's kind of a boring enemy, it can just be kind of annoying, but other times it can be really interesting. There are a couple boss fights that are pretty well done, but generally speaking, you either had to have one enemy around or a whole bunch of enemies around for the combat to be very interesting at all. Aside from that, it was just kind of easy. More often when I died, I didn't feel like it was a challenge I had to overcome so much as just kind of some cheap, like the controls were kind of weird or there were too many enemies around or, whatever. It worked all right, but eh. But of course, combat's only part of a Metroid game. The exploration, that's a majorly important part of this series. And generally it works pretty all right. You've got all the hallmarks. You got the morph ball, you've got, the bombs, the screw attack, wall jump, all that typical stuff to be exploring and finding cool things. The level design for the platforming and puzzling and stuff was generally pretty good. I enjoyed it fine. Those were the times that it really felt like Metroid. Yeah, rolling around in the morph ball and finding cool new things and stuff like that. Those were probably the times I felt most like I was playing a Metroid game, and that was nice. It was nice to have those moments, but it was really just that. Occasionally the game will dump you into an area and then make you go into first-person mode and you have to look all around and try and aim at something. It's like scanning in Metroid Prime if it didn't actually show you what could be scanned and you had to just, find something that looked a little different. It's like a hidden object game, and you had to aim at whatever was different for a little while before it would even acknowledge that that's what you found. A couple times I just was looking around forever and couldn't find what I was looking for. It was so annoying. I definitely could have done without those sequences. The game also occasionally does a really weird thing where it forces you into, an over-the-shoulder tank control movement. Since, it's the Wii Remote, there's no independent camera control, it's just this awkward, moving forward and turning left and right, all with the D-pad. I don't know, I used to be used to that. Even the old Metroid Prime games, kind of use that, but it's... It's just been so long, it was really awkward. It makes you walk all slow, and I'm really not sure why they did that. I get the feeling it was supposed to be for atmosphere in some cases, but it didn't do much for atmosphere, honestly, and sometimes it wasn't even for that. There was a point where it was just an empty hallway and there were bathrooms and I could go into them and there was nothing in them, but it made me do this tank thing and there just really was no reason for it. I have no idea why that was there. The biggest issue, in my mind, was the implementation of the Metroidvania structure of this game. For those unaware, a Metroidvania game is a type of game where it's kind of open world, not like Skyrim, jump everywhere open world, but you can explore at your leisure, go wherever you want within limits, but then some areas will be blocked off with things that you'll need some other upgrade to get past. So as the game progresses, you'll get, a double jump that lets you get over that high wall, or the ability to do, like the plasma beam that lets you melt the ice in front of that door, whatever, so that you can gradually, the world opens up to you as you play the game. Named Metroidvania, is probably pretty obvious because Metroid and Castlevania were the two grandfathers, if you will, of the genre. And this game doesn't do it all that well. The power-ups that you can get as you go through, extra health or missile tanks or whatever, were honestly mostly just... I felt like they put most of the important ones just, in your way. I'd occasionally... it's one thing, some Metroid games will give you an energy tank after certain boss fights or something like that, because, if someone's not good at finding stuff, you should at least give them something to be able to get more powerful. But this game tended to just plop them right in your way. I think I found a total of one energy tank that I had to try and find, as opposed to ones that were just kind of set in front of me on a few occasions. Missile tanks, on the other hand, were more commonly hidden, but they were also kind of useless because this game doesn't have drops. You don't find things that give you more health or give you more missile ammo or anything like that. You just hold the Wii Remote up and hold A, and you get more missile ammo. And then the only way to refill health is save points, or if you're, really low and about to die, then you can also take a little bit and do that same Wii Remote holding A thing to get a little, 1 or 2 energy tanks of health back. it was just kind of a weird way to go about it, and it made exploration not all that interesting. You know, once I got a few missile tanks, I felt like I was good to go. I never really had a problem running out of missiles in the game after that. And ultimately, the whole idea of exploring and then being able to come back and find something else that you saw, like, it happened on occasion, but I didn't feel motivated to do it, I guess. It wasn't particularly difficult, so, you know, like the 2D Metroid games, you'd come across a boss that was really hard and you'd go, okay, well, I'll go back and try and find some cool things that will make me more powerful. That was interesting. That made me want to go find more things. And then Metroid Prime, it was often, you know, spectacle, right? Like, you see an energy tank and you're like, oh man, how do I get to that? I don't know. And then, you know, you get something cool and you're like, oh man, I can use that to get it. And it was like really satisfying. This one just kind of, you know, there's a dot on the mini-map and I don't know where it is. I don't see it, anything like that. Like, there were a couple moments where I recalled seeing something in an interesting place and I wanted to find it. You know, like I wanted to try and get into this place that I couldn't have gotten into before, but that only really happened a couple times. More often than not, I was just trying to find stuff around me and, you know, using little dots on the mini-map. Like, it technically works, but it wasn't as interesting. It lacked the gameplay drive or just the spectacle and wonder of trying to find these things. You know, just generally exploring, like, wasn't super interesting. The gameplay made it work alright, but, you know, it was pretty linear, really. You know, like, there was just kind of, you walk through all these corridors, and then it leads you all the way back around, and if you want, you can go back through those corridors later on, but going back through corridors isn't all that interesting, and the game makes you do it a couple times for the gameplay anyway, you know? Like, it just did not capture my imagination the way that the best Metroidvania games do. It just kind of was functional. Overall, the gameplay is competently done enough. Like, I generally speaking enjoyed the process of play of this game. Whenever the story came up, I was raging at it, and you'll find out more about that next week. But the gameplay, generally speaking, was enjoyable enough. There were some great moments, some really frustrating moments, but generally it was just kind of mediocre. It just kind of worked, you know? I've heard people say that Metroid Other M is very weak in the story category, but as a game it was alright, and I mean, kinda. It's certainly the weakest of the Metroid games I've played so far, with the exception maybe of the first one, but that's only because of hindsight. Like, I'm not even sure I would claim that Metroid Other M is a better game than the first one, but I did enjoy it a bit more, I suppose, only because of that aging factor. It really felt like the game was trying to combine 2D and 3D Metroid, but didn't necessarily know what the best elements were of both of those. It lost the smooth movement and the sheer enjoyment of navigating around in the 2D games, as well as the relatively simple but quite difficult combat, but it also didn't manage to get the really interesting environments and environmental storytelling of the Metroid Prime games. You know, there weren't the big sprawling areas, or like, it's a gorgeous game, but it didn't inspire the same sense of wonder. It tried sometimes, but, you know, you were on a ship. You know, they would have holograms to make it look like you were in a big area, but you still had this small area to run around in, and you knew that there are walls behind, you know, all those vistas you're seeing. It didn't feel to me like it accomplished the best of 2D Metroid or the best of 3D Metroid. It just kind of mashed the mechanics together in some ways and worked fine. Also, I get the feeling I'm in a majority here, but sometimes I think I'm in the minority. I don't know, but I loved the scanning in Metroid Prime. Like, it's such a great way to deliver backstory and world building and stuff like that without making you do it, but with giving you opportunity to. I loved that so much, and of course that element is also just not here. Every now and again I saw something that seemed interesting and wanted to find out more, and, you know, couldn't. It's just not there, and I really missed that. Now, to be fair, mediocre gameplay is still better than the story. The story is just, oh my gosh, it's so frustrating and horrible. It was a good choice for you guys to vote in, but I also hate you right now. But of course, I will talk more about that next week when the analysis goes up. So thank you very much for listening to my hopefully coherent ramblings on Other M's gameplay. Feel free to comment with your agreements, disagreements, whatever. I'll look forward to telling you all about the story next week. So, I'll see you then.